Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II, was once handed a list for him to approve of all the most influential teachers in his life. And they had a list there of professors in college, perhaps those that were in the military when he was in the military, and those in the political realm that took him under his wing, right? A lot of people that influenced Winston Churchill over the years. Upon getting this list, he wrote a small note on there. And that note basically said, "You have omitted the most important teacher in my life, and that is my mother." The most important teacher in Winston Churchill's life was his mother. And it's an interesting thing because we look at our society today and we see families, right? The ones that we have the most, if you will, the most tentative and soft and warm, fuzzy feelings towards are the mothers, right? Don't believe me? Take a look at Mother's Day versus Father's Day, okay? On Mother's Day, what happens? Moms get, generally speaking, moms get flowers. They come out, they take them out to eat, right? They pick them up, they do things, right? They show up. The kids make cards, they pick flowers, they do all these things. I mean, shoot, my boys were giving my wife toys out of their own bedroom this morning. Okay? That's what they get. That's what moms get. Now, dads, what do dads get? Correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen. You get cheap meat from the supermarket. They show up with a cheap gadget, and they expect you to cook them lunch when they show up. Right? Okay, the guys are nodding their heads. It's the proof. Proof is in the pudding, people. Okay? Mothers hold a special place in our hearts, and they always do. And one of the interesting things is the Bible passage and the message that is, if you will, timeless, that I like to talk about, and I have to say I quote this a lot at home, is found in the book of Ephesians chapter 6. And it deals with a real simple yet profound statement about honoring your mother. Because oftentimes I don't think we totally realize what moms do. I mean, I cannot remember everything my mom did for me when I was a kid, right? It just doesn't happen. I don't remember all the diapers she changed. I don't remember all the messes she had to put up with, the time she took me to the doctor. I don't remember the efforts she had, or shoot, for that matter, all the gray hairs I may have given her over the years doing stupid stuff that I look back on and think, that was no big deal. But now that I have kids, I can sympathize a little bit more. Right? Moms put up with a lot. They do a lot. And they do it because they care. They do it because they love you. And so this morning, we're going to look at it from a perspective of a child. What do we have in response to that? What is so important in this role that needs to be understood and grasped? So if you will, turn to Ephesians chapter 6, and we're going to find this concept of honoring your mother. Ephesians 6, 1 through 3. It's a very simple and short passage. I'll read it, and then we'll make a couple of points on it. It says, "Children, obey your parents as you would the Lord, because this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you, and you may have a long life in the land." It's very fascinating right here. There's a couple of things I want to talk about. And the first one is, many people don't fully grasp, but to whom is this command given? The idea of the child in this case, it says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord." We usually think of this as young kids, right? After all, it does kind of speak to that. The term children applied to those who are, quite frankly, young. Right? This is important for us to understand. The first response we always have in relation to our mothers is always, and it starts when we're kids, as obedience, right? Everybody has a mother, somewhere, someplace, right? No one has existed without it. There have been cases where perhaps the mother is not the same figure that they grew up with. In some cases, it may be there is no figure they grew up with. Those are heartbreaking and sad situations. But as a general principle, I think most of us can say we have a mom And at some point or another, she told us what to do. Now, when she says, do not steal, do not hit, clean up after your mess, those are principles that they establish when they're young. And you know what's fascinating is that things that you grew up with, things that are, if you will, your norm as a child, when you get old, you rarely deviate from them. You know, the book of Proverbs says, train a child in the way that they grow, and when they are old, they will not depart from it. Implying moms heavily instill those values when they're little. So when Paul tells us to obey your children, obey your parents, I think there's an aspect that goes beyond just little kids. Yes, it does deal with that in particular. Yes, absolutely. Kids should obey their parents, okay? Kids should obey their mom. But it goes on when you're older, too. Those principles she tried to instill in us, we don't deviate from them. We need to remember them. We need to honor them. We need to deal with those. Paul speaks about a truth here that is transcendent of time. It's not just when you're a kid and now you're 18, you can go off and do whatever, right? No, Paul's saying, what your mom taught you, don't forget it. Don't forget to remember what mom said, right? Basically what he said. But the word that I want to look at is obedience. Because it says, children, obey your parents. That is what's expected of us. But what does the word obedience, obey, mean? It comes from a combination of the Greek word hupo and akuo, which means hupo meaning under, akuo meaning hear. So it's kind of hearing under your mom. Literally, it means to come under the hearing of somebody else. Okay, to obey means you hear, you listen, you do it, right? As long as under your mother, you should listen and obey. You know, it's a sad commentary that one foreigner, when he came to our country, said the thing that impressed him the most about our country was how the parents obeyed their children. You go out in the supermarket or out in town today, you see a lot of parents doing what their kids demand. And it just baffles me. But I understand it to a degree because I have boys and they like to tell me what to do a lot. Right? There's an aspect of a child that just says, I want. And they view the parents as like an ATM, automatic teller machine, right? You just go ahead and do it. It's very fascinating to me to see that. But to this understand what is our expected, we're called to obey our moms. We're called to understand, to remember that. And the reason for that boils down to what Paul says. He goes, because it is right, he says, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with the promise, they may go well with you and you have a long life in the same. That's a quote of the commandment there. It is very common to divide these two 10 commandments, if you will, into two groups, right? You have the first 4 and the last 6. The first 4 are directly related to the Almighty and to your worship of Him. And the last 6 are more, if you will, relation to other people. You know, the do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, do not commit adultery, right? We have the honor of that. But the Jews, when they were in their philosophical and theological roles, they did not place honor your mother and your father with a horizontal relationship in terms of dealing with mom and dad. They placed it under the understanding of the Almighty. It's basically, for the first and clearest example of God's character is your parents. You understand that? The role that children understand should be they see God through their parents. The understanding of what the parent lives, the lifestyle they have, what they value, should all be about God and what God has done. You know, that is why it would be, under Jewish law, rebellion against parents was considered a capital offense because you were rebelling against God. Now, remember, the Jews took this very seriously, very, very, very seriously. Remember, they picked up stones, right, to stone Jesus for claiming to be the Son of God. They took any kind of capital offense, like literally anything against the name of the Almighty, they took very seriously, and they had no problem executing their law on people. In fact, when the Romans took over and they became in there and Palestine became a state or a territory of Roman Empire, the Romans left the Jewish religion alone. They understood the zealot appeal of this religion and how fanatical it was. And they just said, we're leaving it alone. We're not going to touch it. The idea that we have here is that obeying your parents is a sign, and that picture of mom is one that should be the reflection of the Almighty. That's a very high responsibility to bear for any parent, right? And you think back to all the times you screw up as a parent, and you sit there and you go, how does that look from the view of my kids? And how does that point them to the Almighty? And you sit there and you think, it doesn't. I have screwed up. It's real, okay? You realize you make a lot of mistakes as a parent. No one's immune to that. But the reality should be that is the best view the kids have of the Almighty will be in the parents. And that is why our obedience should always be to our mother and our father. In particular today, as we honor our moms, we need to remember to always remember what she said, because that is our first and clearest picture of what God is. But the question someone may ask me, are there perimeters or limitations here? A term limit, if you will. And the answer is yes, there is. And that is the limit of obedience, what I call. And it says that which contradicts God's other commands. In other words, if your mom were to tell you to go rob a bank, don't. Because God has said, do not steal. If your mom were to tell you to go wash the car and you're 12 years old, there's nothing in the Bible that says do not wash your car. So, go wash the car. It's pretty simple there. It gives us to remember that we are somewhat understanding that we will leave our parents. There's a passage of time given that seems to break us away from our parental obligations. It says right here in Genesis that a man will leave his father and his mother and cling to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. The concept of leaving and cleaving is something they talk about in marriage a lot, but essentially it deals with loyalties. All right? It does deal with that reality that says, where are we going? And sometimes in a marriage, you have your mom and you have your wife, and there's going to be problems and friction, perhaps, between the two. Okay? Mother-in-law jokes aside, the reality boils down to that not everyone gets along with everybody. And sometimes people have to make a choice in terms of the relationships that they're in. And that is where the second part comes in, because I will say that it's really difficult sometimes when you're caught between two of the most influential people in your life, your wife and your mom, and they both want you to go different directions. I can speak from experience. It's not a pleasant feeling. It's not a pleasant area. But what is expected out of us according to Paul in this situation? I think you should go with your wife. All right? Your wife is the one that you've married to. It's the one you go. But how do you deal with that relationship with your mom? That's what Paul says right here. And he says, honor your father and your mother. You honor your mother. The word here for honor is timeo. Probably butchering the Greek there a little bit. But it literally means to place a value on something or to attribute status to. That is, it means to honor. It means to esteem and to value. Okay? Perhaps a good example would just be, lack of better words, you have something you value a lot. Something that you admire. For some people, maybe it's your prized vehicle that you just bought that's sitting in the shop still for over a month. Okay? That thing is what you really like. But if something were to come up and you have to part with that, the honor that you hold that, the esteem, the value that you have with that indicates that you treat it accordingly as such. In other words, you're not going to part with it easily. It's not going to be something that you just cast off and say, oh well, no big deal. No, it means there's going to be pain, there's going to be contemplation, there's going to be things that you have to deal with as you come to grips with these terms. All right? So when you have a mother, what's expected of you is to honor her, to put her up there. And then if something were to come up and it does cause you to have a conflict, the way you know you're honoring your mom is that it hurts you. You know, that is what we're talking about. That honor, that esteem. So he says to honor your mother. And he says we have to do that. The Hebrews in Exodus 20:12, they translated the word as kabod, which can be translated as glory. But literally, it means to take something heavy, right? Honor here is similar to saying that the person carries a lot of weight. And that is what it is. Your emotional, your mentality, everything you deal with your mom is honor, esteemed, and it influences you wherever and however you go. Right? That's really kind of way of saying we just don't just randomly, flippantly treat moms like they're just an ATM. They are somebody, even if they're in the past and dead, that we look back on and we carry that respect and that prestige with us for the rest of our lives. Honor your father and your mother. And he says it may go well with you. There's a promise to go along with it. It may go well with you, and then you may have a long life on the land. Now, I look at this and say there's an obvious implication here. Okay? Mom says, don't ride your bike without a bicycle helmet. You do. You get hit. You fall off. You bang your head noggin. You have a concussion. So many concussions cause brain injuries. So many brain injuries end your life, right? A bike helmet saves lives. Obeying and honoring your mom in that way could save a life. Could save your life. Extend it. Mom says, don't juggle with chainsaws. Okay? Don't do it. Don't even try. Okay? I'm telling you from experience here. Okay? Listen to your mom. What parents generally give us advice that is relevant to our life. And they speak from years of experience. All right? Looking back on my life growing up, I could not understand my mother. We spoke two different languages. We viewed two different things. We had two different value systems. Everything about us was completely polar opposite. And then 23, 24, 25 rolled around, right? And suddenly I started realizing, hey, that actually makes sense. I understand where she's coming from now. I understand that. And you begin to understand that. That experience that you have as a teenager and as a young person, you think you know more than your mom. And then you get up there and you realize she's already traveled that road and she was just trying to keep you from making the same mistake she did. Honor your mom. Her words carry weight. Who she is, esteem her, value her. She does that for a purpose. So the question may come to us is how should we expect to honor our mothers? And the first one I'm going to say is speak to them with respect. About them with respect. To respect that name, even if they're not present or within earshot. Preacher Campbell Morgan had 4 sons, and they all became ministers of the gospel. At a family reunion, a friend asked one of the sons, "Which Morgan is the greatest preacher?" With that, he looked at his friend dead in the eye, and the son replied, "Mom." You speak to them even when they're not in earshot. You hold their name up high. You look at them and you value them. That is what we're called to do. Honor your mother. Speak to her with that. You speak of them in a respectful tone. Very interesting, as I mentioned, Winston Churchill. That's what we have. We have that idea that they have to be respected. Even though they may not be the world's smartest or the greatest, and they may have made mistakes, there are still aspects to them that we are called to speak them. John Wesley gave his advice to his mother, John Wesley's mother gave John Wesley some advice when he went to college. She said, "Whatever strengthens the body over the mind is a sin to you, however harmless it may be." John Wesley wrote that in his Bible. It was there. As he went to this school, as he went off, and he explored the world, he remembered what his mom's opinions were, what she thought. How do you honor your mother? Remember what she said. Her opinions, her views, they matter. And the last one that I would want to challenge everyone here is perhaps the hardest. You got to learn to forgive your mother. There are a lot of mistakes moms make. And sometimes those mistakes are very grievous, and sometimes they hurt a lot. But we're called to forgive our mothers. That is how you honor your mother. That is how we honor her. We seek the opinion. We speak respectful. We hold them in a high position, and we forgive them. And we do that all because of what Paul says, what God has given us to do, to honor your mother. Today of all days, it's a reminder for us. A reminder for us to remember our moms. The good that she taught us, the lessons that we've learned, and the things we can go from there. Always remember the attitude that God requires of us in relation to our mom. To put her in a high plateau and value her all the days of our life. Let's close with a word of prayer.